have presented this chart, and it is not, of course, the be-all and the game end all of the game design, but it is worth keeping in mind for purposes of those twinned questions that I alluded to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to characterize the game in terms of what it offers, let's just say, as you said before, a White Wolf Prince Caspian Changeling game.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Prince Caspian meets Changeling. Fair.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Ish.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that, and then the question is, well, why? What's cool about it? What is the... And I'm not talking about necessarily anything about its mechanics features.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking more in terms of what is exciting about that to you.
Yeah, so what's exciting about it to me is I'm trying to figure out how to say it without making reference to some of the games we just alluded to.
You can use the same, instead of saying like XYZ, it's
Mm-hmm.
more like, what is it that you wanted or got, or didn't
Mm-hmm.
get but wanted
Mostly
from
didn't get.
those? Yes, but what are they? What are the words?
So I want a game in which where the play is about the end to an extent, and you stand this valiant last stand
Mm-hmm.
for a worthy cause, and you're responsible in the end for the outcome, and you can lose.
Mm-hmm.
I want basically, there's a lot of aesthetic differences and a lot of mechanical differences, but if I really get back to it, I want to have a game for 16-year-old me who always wanted to play Apocalypse and Werewolf the Apocalypse, but never got to. The apocalypse never came. We just kept fighting it forever, and it never happened. And I never felt
Right.
responsible for saving Gaia or not saving Gaia.
Right. Okay. So with all that in hand, then properly, someone could ask, why do we need a new game for that?
Mm-hmm.
And you can even ask that if there isn't a game that does it exactly. You can still say, why do we need a new game for that?
Right.
One can always hack a game. I could say, well, pretty easy. I could just set up some character classes for 5th E and we're all set.
Mm-hmm.
Another person might say PBTA in that fast and that, and that formulaically.
Mm-hmm.
One could say, oh, wow, man, you can do anything. GURPS.
Mm-hmm. My skin crawls. Sorry.
That's my point. I was trying to keep giving examples until your skin crawled. And the question is, why, therefore, because it did, what does this game design bring to those features we just went over, such that this game is its own thing? And even if one played exactly what we just talked about, using a hack of Werewolf,
mm-hmm.
PBTA, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition,
mm-hmm.
or GURPS, and you could say, that's all well and good, but my game, ...
I would say that it's all well and good, but what I want from a game that plays like this is a series of short conflicts where you are tactically, in some way, that's a weird word, but tactically responsible for the outcome.
Perfectly good word.
Tactically responsible for the outcome, such that you can play multiple conflicts to ultimately decide whether you win or lose the session, and therefore get to answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
If the conflicts are too long or the conflicts are too bouncy, to use the term,
mm-hmm.
like where it's mostly just about fortune, then you aren't ultimately responsible, and therefore I think not ultimately invested in whether or not you get to answer the question.
Let me add, if I'm correct,
mm-hmm.
if the mechanics themselves are not too random, so that whatever you do, you're just going to find out where they bounce anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Also, aren't you saying as well that no single person, like a game master in this case, would be able to weasel out? They can't give you another chance.
Right.
Right? They can't, wiggle it and say, well, I'll let that one slide. We'll just treat that. That's you guys can save that portion.
Yeah, you can't fudge the roll. You can't.
Right.
Yeah.
So
the conflict reveals it.
Everybody's got to live with what you said.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you've got systemic outcomes. And strategic, tactical is probably better. You're right. Tactical and tactically based and systemically based outcomes that are not negotiable.
Right. Well, the only way that they're negotiable is choose to call in your curses, but if you do that too often, then you end up becoming a monster and
subroutine.
Yeah.
Subroutine.
That's true.
I'm not saying that they're not modulated, but that's part of the tactics.
Yeah, it's true.
So, or vice versa, the tactics are part of those. I don't care. Right. So, with that in, do you see how now, knowing those two questions, this is that starting color that I was talking about. A person is or isn't excited because now they're going to say, oh yeah, I mean, some part of them inside while playing is going to say, oh yeah, prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Does your design do all those things you just said? And therefore, after the first session, I really am looking at an up or down, a sense of, wow, we have really taken a blow. This incoming culture, this incoming civilization, this incoming group of exploiters, they're tough.
Right.
Or do we say, aha, drove off the first wave. Let's see what happens in the next.
Right.
But it's not just that up or down. You can look at what happened and say, we need to be careful, or we need to be excited, or we need to be committed, or we need to be willing to make sacrifices, or any of those things.
Yeah.
And you look and you say, wow, 4 more of these? Shoot, man, how many of us are still going to be standing or still ourselves by the time that happens?
Yeah.
At that point, you're looking at your curse and looking at maybe the one person in the group that activated their curse that section and go, ooh, all right, next session is going to be different, isn't it? In some way.
Right.
That's the kind of excitement we're talking about. You're not glad that you just played, just because it was it. You're glad because this next round is pretty cool.
Right.
And that's where improvement and powers and stuff can be more than just a drug hit. It can actually be more about what you're going to do is cooler. I criticized in the discussion with Dustin, I criticized the idea that improvement is just met by improvement by improvement, and nothing really changes.
Right.
And so you're sort of lured into, I got to keep playing to see if I improve. But really, there's no change in play quality.
Right.
Here, I'm talking about when there is. When there is a change in play quality based on the mechanics or improvements or what have you. Now do you see why what I called reward mechanics in that first diagram is actually a big deal?
Yeah.
Again, there are people who say they despise reward mechanics, that they don't need them. Play is its own reward, is the usual claim.
Mm-hmm.
Without being too aggressive about this and not really intended as a rebuttal, but just as a clarifier, I then ask, which ones?
Right.
And in many cases, you will find reward mechanics in there that they had not really. They say, well, RuneQuest doesn't have reward mechanics. But you say, yeah, but your skills go up, right? Based on using your skills, there is a means by which they improve. Well, yeah, but that's not a reward mechanic. And you're like, okay, And I also want to point out that I need a better word, consequence mechanic or something like that, because I'm very interested in damage and recovery actually being in the same bag.
Right.
as not, especially like in a game where the damage just goes away right away. And I have games like that, or games where the damage does not go away right away. And I have games like that too.
Mm-hmm.
When it doesn't go away, then it properly belongs in the reward mechanic category. How bad
Mm-hmm.
off am I hurt, and how does that relate to the next session that we play in?
Right.
And that's a change too. And sometimes those can be pretty significant. So when we look at those shift, consequence, change, reward, damage, gain, loss, well, there's no really good word for it, is there? Because they are always and only worth it if they are felt at the level of experiencing the color. It's not just that my hit points are down, I'm hurt.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not just that I leveled up, it's like I am a bigger part of this setting now. I am people. Right. I can now be called Chevalier.
Right.
And these things matter a lot. I have talked about this so many times that people are, I shouldn't even like include it in the video. People are going to be like, all right, why don't you just clip out the old video and stick it in here, Edwards? But I like to talk about how in the earliest D&D, the levels were named with no explanation or definition at all.
Right.
First level magic user is called a
Prestidigitation.
Yeah, well, no, Fighting Man was a class.
Oh, it's the class. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Yeah.
I'm talking about if we go to the magic users, your first level magic user was a Prestidigitator.
Mm-hmm.
You go up in rank, and sooner or later, somewhere along the line, you're a conjurer, or you're a magician, you're a sorcerer. This is before all those things became character classes. Right. And you know, it got kind of exciting. You know, I am now a magician. And of course, you know where the big one is. Wizard. Fighter, 10th level, you're a lord.
Yeah. I remember I had it was in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, but I had a fighter that got up to 2nd level, and they're like, you get a keep, but we were in the middle of a dungeon, so it made a little sense.
Well, it's kind of interesting that in this first version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, they had some things about keeps and stuff like that, but exactly when you got it and what that meant was often extremely vague. Right. And when it came to many of the others, I mean, the clerics were very carefully codified. You were an acolyte when you started. Right. What did that mean? What did that have to do with like you, your temple, your hierarchy, your religion, anything? No idea. The reason I bring it up is because it's that very lack of detail that led people to be extremely excited about these terms, which were officially bestowed upon them by the table, but they had to say what it meant. Right. They meaning the group. I mean, you could say, well, I am now, you know, I forget what they were for cleric, but we could pick one of them. Obviously, priest is one of the high ones, but let's say it was somewhere, you know, in the mid-range and you were some kind of a, who knows what, but some cool religious term. Mm-hmm. And you started strutting around and insisting that all the other, you know, player characters called you this, or that non-player characters called you this, and, you know, gave a little nod of respect to your little, you know, eagle god emblem or something. And this was ordinary play a lot of the time. What I'm saying is that reward mechanics are only reward mechanics, or only functional as such when they are themselves a piece of that imaginative excitement. So when we go back to your structure chart now, and I pat myself on the back in an obnoxious way for saying, and now you see how the two concepts work together. Mm-hmm. When you go back to the structure chart, the next question is, what on there can change? The curse is the obvious one.
Mhm.
The status of the realm, or the potential status of the realm, is another.
Right. It's tied into curses, but the binary of are you a darkling? Have you become a darkling?
Right. Yeah, that's tied to the curses, certainly. That's the big version of it. I guess you would say maybe that's the big change, and then sort of gradations of your potential for it. Kind of depends on the mechanics. Looking at these now as a big thing, clearly, that kind of top arrow is what you can't design as such. The one coming back over the top in the big diagram. You can't design that. That's a social effect. It's an emotional effect. It's an inspired effect. It's what to examine in terms of playtesting, but it's not something you stick in there. You can't stick happiness into something. Right. But you can take a look at that bottom part, and obviously that middle of the bottom part explodes.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, everything in that long list, well, potentially, is a direct or indirect contributor to the reward, with or without its mechanics. So therefore, roll to hit is important insofar as it affects, indirectly or directly, your hit points.
Right.
That's a pretty crude example, but I'm pretty sure you can see a lot of similar ones. Sometimes the perfect example in terms of raw clarity is Fallout from Dogs in the Vineyard, which is very literally from this resolution roll jumps in your change.
Right.
Which isn't all that different from your classic BRP thing where your skills go up insofar as you use them and then make successful improvement rolls. But often it's less direct. In fact, often it's very abstract. End of the session, everybody gets from 3 to 5 points. Spend as you see fit. Period. So in that case, the impact of mechanics to reward in mechanics terms is very vague or very indirect, but it's still there. You had to be there and use, think of all those vague things like participation. They're really saying, were you in there pitching with the system? Were you involved? And if you were, and you were there rolling your dice and announcing your actions and saying, what do we do to everybody else and all those things, that's good enough for your experience points. You got the experience points. Go. Never mind all the fiddly causal nuances. We're just going to, you get your 3 to 5 points and you decide, well, you know what? I think my celerity is going up. I've got enough to get up another point in celerity. Let's do that.
Right.
And you may not even care about justifying it, but if you have to, by the rules, it makes sense that you have to justify such a thing. No problem. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, well, due to what was going on, this is how I improve. Particularly if it's a skill or something very concrete, you can say, yeah, I get better at my stealth. Even though it was completely elective that you put your point into stealth, whatever. Everybody says, yeah, that makes sense. So do you see what I mean by direct or indirect? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Well, it matters for that game, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't matter in terms of either or for good game design. This whole picture of mechanics now, properly understood as subroutines of this sense of satisfaction. Now, this sounds like a circle. Well, the mechanics are good if they make you happy, and you're happy if the mechanics are good, so why don't we just make the good mechanics and we're all set? And that's not, I think that's back to front. First of all, you have different structural features of the game, so what is a changeable feature for game A isn't a changeable feature for game B. Number one. So you've got completely different variables of what can change. You can also talk about how much and how often. Are we having incremental jumps? Does that mean that there's no reward mechanic? No, if they're incremental jumps, you're still en route, even if nothing has changed on the sheet. You've still got, XPs mounting that direction, or, you get to change up X or Y every second session. Well, okay, we played one more, and I can. So there's still some kind of awareness, even if it's not steady improvement. The procedures of play, indirectly or directly, are relevant to this important satisfaction to move us into this cycle, and that change is crucial to this. You asked in the previous session, you mean change in the fiction? And the answer is yes, but change in the fiction as implemented through the procedures of play.
Right.